So previously we saw the Andals have swept across Westeros, leaving the High Towers of Old Town as the last standing point in the south to hold magical entities. Alyssa Arryn and Bran the Builder have fled to Old Town to escape the Andal wave, and here we find that if Sansa is indeed meant to parallel Alyssa, then we can infer something interesting here. Sansa and Daenerys have a very antagonistic relationship in this show that feels very unusual, unless this is one of the points that George specifically notes will happen for some reason in the books. So it makes sense that when Daenerys invades Westeros, she may start in the south of the Reach, possibly led by Marwyn to Old Town, paralleling Aegon the Conqueror supposedly visiting Old Town before his conquest, most likely with his 3 dragons. It is curious as the Southern Reach has a lot of lore which hints to the existence of dragons in the ancient histories. The legends of House Bulwer speak of a son of Garth who drinks so much bull's blood he grows shiny black horns. And this puts me in mind of a dragon feasting on bulls and having black horns, which may point to the dragon horns being from an actual dragon, which we will look at later on. We also find that there are 3 myths surrounding dragon slayers, which may imply one for each of Daenerys' dragons in the future. We have Davos Dragon Slayer, so perhaps Davos will kill a dragon. We have a Ser Wyn, who may be a knight named Wyn, or as I believe, a Serwyn or Kerwin, who kills a dragon for the Green Hands in the legends. So he is an Andal following the takeover of Highgarden by the Andal wave. And if I'm right, Serwyn is the second-hand man to Bran the Builder's brother, who may indeed found House Stark later on, as the Serwyns are really close to Winterfell, implying that they must have a close bond between the 2 houses. Now, Ser Wyn of the Mirror Shield saves a Princess Derissa from giants at Old Town, which is very similar to Alyssa. So it seems likely the brothers competing over the Woods Witch from Horn Hill are these same people of legend here, which would point to the fact that Serwyn is indeed a knight connected to House Stark, which would later get their own lands and titles. Serwyn is also somewhat similar to Marwyn, but I can't see him slaying a dragon intentionally, as he seems to be working against that goal, as he opposes the Maesters and their attempts in the past to rid the world of dragons. Now, lastly, our 3rd Slayer is Sir Galadon of Morn. Now, Morn is of Tarth and has a strong parallel to Brienne of Tarth, who is sworn to fight Sansa. So I believe she will slay a dragon to protect Sansa at some point before they flee north. So by comparing these 3 legends, we can see that there's a link to Horn Hill, which makes me think that Daenerys will have her battle against the Tarleys in the books, much like she does in the show, and that Sansa will briefly be here before fleeing with Brienne to head north. So we find that dragons being here implies our next Gemstone Empire has definitely arrived in Westeros by this time, the Amethyst Empress. Now we can determine the High Towers were indeed dragon lords before the Andals removed the dragons, as they are noted to have been kings in the Reach in their own right, and were the last to be assimilated, most likely as dragons are a pretty good bargaining chip when it comes to keeping your own kingdom separate. But once the dragons were gone, the High Towers folded. We also see the Citadel has sphinxes, which are notably Valyrian design decor. Also, pyromancers are noted to have been important in Old Town until the Maesters replaced them. Pyromancers are important, as we've seen so far, to fire magic wielders, aka the Proto-Valyrians, and so this implies to us that the founding myth of the High Towers occurs here after the Dragon Lords are removed. Bufor is the first Andal king of the High Towers and weds Maris the Maid, a supposed child of Garth Greenhand, possibly the only remaining child of this dragon family, part of the taking brides culture that we have covered so far. Uther supposedly has Bran the Builder rebuild the tower, and his son is the one who founds the Order of the Maesters. Uther is notably also the one who supplants Argoth Stoneskin the Giant, and we know Bran the Builder is associated with the Giants through his building projects, which we will come back to later in this video. So we see our great exile occurs and covers the Ironborn mythos as well as the Kiss of Life, and it appears to be that Bran the Builder is also in fact the Bloodstone Emperor. So Bloodstone is interesting as a gemstone as it is actually green and red. However, we see from ancient peoples gems are often misinterpreted, and a bloodstone could also be someone referring to something such as a red gem like a ruby. And we even see in Arthurian legend the Holy Grail or Sangreal can be considered a bloodstone, which is said to have fallen from the sky, implying a meteor. So the Bloodstone Emperor is known to have worshipped a stone that fell from the sky. The association with red gemstones would also tie him to the Valyrian cult of the Red Priests, who worship rubies as fire and blood stones. We see the Bloodstone Emperor also starts the Church of Starry Wisdom, which likely correlates to the ancient peoples who used darkness in the sky, who wore red masks and speak in stars like Quaif, most likely the forebears of the Valyrian Red Priesthood. And interestingly enough, their red lacquer masks puts me in mind of the red door that Daenerys keeps seeing. So it seems likely that the Starry Wisdom cult are users of glass candles, and it's notable that the cult also exists in port towns, as stars are important to seafarers to navigate, as the cult has its origins with the oily black stone and the giants who were seafarers of ancient times. The Bloodstone Emperor having connections to feasting on human flesh may imply his connection to the weirwoods, which we see from the Ironborn legends. These trees are indeed considered demonic and flesh-eating. Now we also learn that the Amethyst Empress is meant to be his sister, and that he usurps her in a blood betrayal. So at some point, Bran the Builder will be forced to betray his love Alyssa, as we see from various myths of heroes and their wives. This never does seem to end well for the lovers. An interesting note is that the Amethyst Empress implies she is definitely of Valyrian blood, as the amethyst implies the blood colour is purple eyes, and we see that other details surrounding the Bloodstone Emperor would confirm this, as he is said to have also taken a tiger woman as his wife. Tigers are noted to be important to two sites in this world. Carth do trade in tiger fur, and we know Carth potentially is a home of the Proto-Valyrians, and also Volantis has the tiger political faction, and Volantis has the blood of Old Valyria in spades. So his wife Alyssa most likely descends from Volantine blood before her family moved to the Vale. The Amethyst Empress being his sister would imply he has Valyrian blood too, and so it's possible this was not actually the case, and this is another embellishment that occurs over time, as most likely this points us in the direction of Valyrians, as our most known Valyrian family in the story are the Targaryens, who are very common practicers of incest. Now, we have Bran and Alyssa fleeing the Reach, and it appears their method of transport is by ship in order to reach the north, as the Andals have conquered all the other lands between it. So it appears the Grey King, our next legendary figure, who builds us Naga, the great sea dragon ship, is also Bran the Builder. And we can infer Naga was indeed actually a ship, as just by looking at the bones on the hill, they are most definitely weirwood, but are carved, as normal groves are noted to be twisted and writhing looking things. This seems to resemble more of a ship's hull, based on the equidistal spacing of these extremely smooth pillars. It appears that the sea dragon name was attributed after it attempted to land at Sea Dragon Point and was turned away by storms calling down the wrath of the storm god, who runs it aground in the Iron Islands. And we know from Durin's God's Grief that the storm god is the children of the forest, who disapprove of his union with Alyssa. So they likely attacked because Bran is an Andal, explaining why the Grey King supposedly taunts the storm god, who strikes out with lightning. So the Grey King being a giant may not actually be true, but an embellishment of the link between Bran and the giants to cover up his true story. We know that the throne he sits on is carved from Naga's jaw, and his crown is driftwood, and both are indeed meant to be weirwood, as the driftwood throne and crown come from the shipwreck, and we get the legend of the Grey King killing Ig, a demon tree that eats human flesh, which he uses to build his first ship, and again gives us some dark implications, as Ig references Yggdrasil, the world tree of Norse mythology. So the weirwoods are a world tree. They are indeed interlinked all across the globe. It is also during this crash of the boat that Bran possibly drowns following the shipwrecking and becomes the drowned god, showing us that drowning is indeed yet another way to gain access to the weirwood power, as seen with Patchface. We even hear in our story, "It is beautiful beneath the sea, but stay too long and you will drown. And what is dead can never die, but rises again harder and stronger." And so these sayings may have a connection to this event. Drowning is in fact a way of getting close to death but not dying, which is a prerequisite, it seems, to opening the third eye ability. And it is possible that this drowning is in actual fact the origin of the Greyscale virus, and also the fiery kiss of life. We see that if the Grey King is indeed Bran, who is conflated as a giant man, then we look back at the giant who wanted Maris the Maid, Argoth Stoneskin. Greyscale is stone skin. Bran the Builder gets infected with Greyscale, which is how he becomes the Grey King. So it appears that Greyscale is in fact a defence mechanism of the weirwood fungus, as Greyscale itself appears to act much like a fungal infection. Even the treatments used on it, which we see with Shireen, are common treatments for fungal infections, which makes it curious as to what it actually was that cured Shireen's, if indeed it was cured. So the stone men being weirwood infected also stands up when you consider that the legends correlate on this. The Grey King is revived by his Merling wife. In Croyane, where we have Greyscale, the Shrouded Lord is said to have raised the waters to drown the area, or that he was a statue revived by a kiss, which also links to the Titan of Braavos, who is said to awake and walk into the sea. So we see the motif of a man who has Greyscale is revived by a wife by a kiss, who is also a Merling, which we have established Alyssa is of the Merlin Proto-Valyrian culture, which also founds Braavos when it leaves Valyria, as the Titan strongly resembles the Merlin King's sigil seen by the likes of the Manderleys, which eventually becomes the Grey King sigil of House Grey Iron. So the final component of this story is the kiss of the Merling wife that is said to revive him. It is heavily paralleled in the kiss of the Red Priests, which revives someone as a firewhite. It appears the implication here is the kiss is meant to purge the Greyscale from the body, as we find that there is a connection here between the kiss and a fire cult, and the wildlings even believe that redheads are kissed by fire. So redheads are important in their story, and we can infer Alyssa is a redhead based on her family bloodline, which brings up the fact that Sansa is also a redhead and is often associated with kisses, most notably the unkiss, and also the kiss with Baelish that Lysa sees. So we see that Alyssa and Sansa parallels are continuing, so she will also have special powers in the coming books potentially. And it is worth noting that Sansa is indeed special genetically, as she is a redhead with blue eyes, which is actually a super rare combination of genetics, so there is definitely something more here than we realise. Now this made me realise, in the story we see the kiss of life performed by red priests. Now, if it always worked, they could resurrect people left and right, so nobody in this world would die. So why do only these cases appear to be successful, as there are only 2 confirmed cases? Beric Dondarrion and Catelyn Stark, both carriers of the red-haired gene. And while I can't confirm Beric Dondarrion's eye colour, it may be that he indeed has these. So it appears that redheads with blue eyes can be resurrected in some way, as we see with Catelyn, who becomes a corpse woman with white hair, just like the Night's Queen. White-haired and blue-eyed. So this may be clues pointing us to her origins, and makes me question how exactly Jon will be revived, if he is indeed at all revived at the Wall, as he is not a redhead, so perhaps the process will make him one. So it seems likely that Alyssa in actual fact will become the Night's Queen through some means, which may be why Dany Flint is such an important tale of the Wall, as what is Flint? Flint is a stone which can be used to create fire. So the Merling's wife of the drowned Bran used fire to purge Greyscale. So this fits with the idea of Flint creating fire. Dany Flint explains where the Night's Queen came from, and of the branches of House Flint, we get sigils for 2 of them. One is a grey stone version of the Garth Greenhand sigil, linking us back to the Reach, and the other is the Flints of Widow's Watch. So we get a potential widow, a ship at sea, and a pair of striking blue eyes. Now, Ironborn culture here is interesting, as the arrival of the Grey King here, it is noted that the Seastone chair is already present when the first men arrive, implying it was left by the Giants, as it is an oily black idol. The first men in Proto-Valyrian culture seem to meet here in mixes together. As we see, it is noted the Grey King taught the first men seafaring. He's the one who brought them here on a ship, which means the Giants were here already, and that is why they, the first men here, are the ones finding the idol. We see the Ironborn split into 16 sons, who rule the islands as kings of salt and rock, echoing the Merling duality worship we see in the Narrow Sea cultures. It would appear this union of cultures is supported by the Rhoynar Long Night myth and the Valyrian legends, as it is said that the Old Man of the River, or the Grey Merlin King, makes peace with the Crab King. The Valyrians even claim they get their driftwood thrown from this pact, explaining why it is no longer in the Iron Islands but on the other side of Westeros. We also see that the Iron Islands are a culture who were known to elect rulers rather than inherit them, which further ties them to the culture of Valyria. The Kingsmoot are presided over once the Grey King is gone by Galen Whitestaff, wielding a weirwood stick. We see that the elections are quickly overthrown despite his efforts, as Grey Irons end the Kingsmoot and rule as a bloodline, and so any kings elected in the Kingsmoot must predate the Long Night. Which is curious, as we turn our attention towards the north, we find that there are legends of the first king that existed who led men into Westeros and is hinted to not be Garth Greenhand. We saw this was indeed the case, as the Giants got there first. This first king is in fact a giant, and we see this supported by links to the Barrows, as the Great Barrow supposedly contains the first king, and also supposedly a king of the Giants. We even see Barrows most likely are giant burial rituals, as there is note of a giant barrow at Long Lake. We hear that the Barrow kings, who claim descent from the first king, join the Marsh kings of the Neck and oppose southern invaders, which explains Moat Cailin being a large black stone structure, and also the Crannigs, as they are similar to another giant's blood culture, the floating Fisher Queen palaces. We hear the Barrow kings fight against the Starks, known as the Kings of Winter, and submitted to them, with the Starks receiving a daughter in marriage, which we have seen before time and again, and so a Bran Stark supposedly drives giants out of the north. The Giants founded Winterfell and not the Starks. The old keep is notably Giants' handiwork. It has a round stone keep and gargoyles as well as the crypts, which feature black wood doors. So the Starks we see here are most likely not Bran the Builder, as he is fleeing north on a ship, but based on later tales that we have, he may in fact be his sibling or his father. Another point that is often brought up is that the crypts do indeed seem anachronistic, as if they were first men, why do they have iron swords when the first men used bronze? And we can explain this away if they were giants, as the giants were the ones who brought iron in the first place all the way from the far east, which we see reflected in the crown of the Kings of Winter. When they joined with the first men, it is a crown of bronze and iron. And so the Andal Starks wipe out the giant rulers of the land and begin to take over. We get tales of the warg kings of Sea Dragon Point, who are allied with the Children of the Forest. However, the Kings of Winter defeat them and slay their beasts and sons and greenseers, taking the daughters as prizes. This may be the same battle as the killing of Gavin Greywolf and his kin, which also seems similar to the rebellion of the Dreadfort and the Greystarks, in which we know the Greystarks died while the Boltons survived, implying that the Boltons switched sides as we've seen them do in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's strongly believed the Blackwoods were likely vassals to this wolf house, and that the Starks take as their sigil the wolf, and so these Blackwoods are forced to flee south following their defeat, ending up in the Riverlands. We know in real life that ravens and wolves are noted to have a symbiotic relationship, which makes this all the more plausible. Now, an interesting oddity we find here is that of Theon Stark, who opposes Andal invasion of the north and is noted to have fought Harrick-Hor, who was chosen in a Kingsmoot by the Ironborn. Now, as we noted, the Ironborn stopped their Kingsmoots in the Dawn Ages, so this is before the Long Night. So the original giant rulers were in actual fact the Starks, before Bran the Builder's family took their name and lands. So the Andals did indeed take the north and proceed to purge it. So it appears that the magic peoples would continue to flee further north and are joined by Bran the Builder in the form of the last hero. And so in the next and final part of this theory, we will look at the last hero, the Night's King and Queen, and the mythology surrounding the Dawn War and the Wall, as there is a lot going on here than what people realise.